So our power muscles, the old glutes, often cop a lot of work in our lifting, running, and our sedentary sitting lives. So it's important that we know how to release those glutes. And I'm also going to take you through a lateral hip release to show you how to release those sides of your hips, which will also become tight and stiff if you spend long hours at the desk or you take up those bipedal activities such as running. So the positional stuff for our glute release, which we'll work on today, I want you to think of two things, and it's all about your clothing. So I want you to think about the top of your back pocket and then your belt line. So working our glute release, which is going to release our piriformis and the surrounding area, we're looking for placing that ball at the top of our pocket on our jeans. So that's the easiest way to think about it, but that's going to look like so. So it's going to be on the little higher side of your glutes, but we're simply going to wedge that in. And the way to find it is we're simply just going to roll around until we hit that trigger point on that piriformis. Now, you'll know that when you either grimace, your face changes, or you might take a deep breath, or you might feel that referral pain or referral discomfort down your leg, meaning we're hitting the nerve that runs down your leg. And what we're going to do is simply sit on that position and we're going to start doing some clamshells. Once we do 4 or so clamshells there, we're going to go into some kicks. 4 kicks. And then from there, we're going to go into pivots. So we're going to draw a circle with our glutes on the floor. So by keeping the pressure on that ball, we're going to circle one way and then circle back the other. And you can repeat that as many times as you need to release your glutes. Now, your lateral hip release, we're thinking of that belt line. So from the piriformis, we're going to come up a little bit, and then we're also going to lay on a side supported position to hit that lateral part of our hip. So side supported, we can extend that bottom leg and we use our top leg to brace our position. Now we're simply bringing our hips up off the ground and we're going to cross friction left and right or back and forth across that lateral aspect of our hip. Now this might also trigger some referral pain down the sciatic nerve, and that's okay too. We simply take more weight on the elbow and more weight on the leg in order to keep ourselves up off the ball into a position that we can maintain tension or pressure on it, but not push into pain. So we're simply going to pivot back and forth along that lateral hip line as far as we need to feel that release. There you have it, guys. Lateral hip, glute release to keep those power muscles in working order. Long days of sitting, we all suffer from a little bit of lower back stiffness or pain. Here's a nice little QL release we can do to help release the tension in our lower back that'll help free up our posture and avoid some of that negative effect when we spend long days at the desk. So we're aiming for our QL. That is located on the side of our, next to our spine in that section in our lower back. What you would probably think of as the bit next to the gap where your kidneys are. But that muscle we're aiming for the edge of that muscle. We're going to grab that ball and we're going to find that edge. We're going to lay down. We're going to bring this leg up over the other leg, and we're simply pivoting over that QL. At no stage should this ball go over your spine. If you've gone over your spine, you've come too far into the midline, and you need to get it on the edge of that muscle. So when you're rolling across it, it should be going out away from you. Once you hit a sore spot, spend some time in there. Breathe into the ball using our diaphragmatic breath. Once the pain drops away, back into those little cross frictions as we go. There you have it, guys. Make sure you do both sides. Notice if there's any difference between sides, but that should help offset some of that sitting and postural stuff that we have when we're at the desk all day. So you've been sitting at the desk all day and you want to get out for a run or get to the gym and get the most out of your training. If we've been in this position, sitting, regardless if it's sitting just on the floor or sitting in an office chair all day, we want to make sure our hip flexors are in good condition to make sure we can get into full hip extension to make sure we're maximizing our training. So our psoas, which is a group of muscles that works from your lower back all the way through the front of your hips, which incorporates hip extension. What we want to use is our trigger point ball here, and we're going to do a psoas release, which is going to be located an inch beside our belly button. Now, pretty easy to find for yourself when you put your finger in your belly button and we go an inch beside it. We're going to get that ball, we're going to lay down on it, and I'm going to show you a couple of ways to help release those hip flexors to help you get into full extension. So, ball, inch beside the belly button, and we're laying down. We're simply just going to wriggle around until we find that trigger point. If you don't have a trigger point here or you can't find the stiffness, that's actually a good thing. It means our hip flexors probably are in relatively good shape, or we just simply don't have any work we need to do here, or we simply missed it, which isn't a bad thing. But we'll cover off on a lot of hip extension drills in our mobility section. So if you can't get this particular one, because it can be tricky, don't worry, we'll loop around, we'll get it anyway. So once we find that point, we're simply going to breathe in, into the ball. And on the breath out, we're going to arch up. Once we come back down, we're going to breathe in again. But this time when we arch up, we're going to grab some traction off the floor and try and pull ourselves a little bit across the floor like so. And we're going to relax. The next stage is raising that leg on the same side that ball's on. So we're going to lower our head, breathe in. On our breath in, we're going to arch up, pull forward and raise the leg. And we come down. And we're going to repeat that particular element as many times as we need to feel that pain drop off or that discomfort drop off. And we're going to use that traction to really push into the ball and release that psoas. So there you have it, guys. A handy little hip flexor release to help offset all those hours sitting at a desk. Here is our quad release. As we find, when we squat, lift, carry, and load things, we're inherently going to have tight quads the more lower body type work we do, and it's important to release them in ways that are going to free up our range of movement to allow us to get to the correct depth in our squat and allow us to move effectively. So we're going to use the ball and the roller today, and we're going to cover a quad release, an ITB release, and a VMO release, which is a part of our quad, but that's that teardrop part of our quad here. We'll use the ball for that. So first things first, we'll do our quad release. Now, we're going to get that roller, and I know you see everyone rolling both legs at the same time. We're going to go to a single leg at a time on our roller. We're going to come down to our elbows here, and we're going to start just above our knee. From here, we're just going to simply inch our way back and forth as we slowly creep up the leg. If we hit a sore spot, we're going to cross friction across that roller. So we're going to drag that quad left and right across the roller. We're then going to add some knee bends. Once we add some knee bends, we then go back to that back and forth motion up the quad. Hit another spot, cross frictions, knee bends. And we work our way all the way up to that quad as high as we can go. Now, the ITB. I'll roll over onto this side now. We're going to do the same, starting at the bottom of just above our knee, and we're going to use this leg to support. And we're simply back and forth, slowly creeping up our quad. If we hit that trigger point again, we're going to go back and forth on those cross frictions. We can try and add a knee bend if we need, but on the side it probably won't have as much of impact because you're not contracting the ITB directly as opposed to when we're on the front of our quad. So we're simply going to roll up and down, cross friction when we hit a sore spot, and progress all the way up that ITB. Now, if you want to come back down the lateral aspect of your quad here, you can, which is in between your ITB and the front of your quad. You might notice there are also some tight spots there. So we're simply coming back down the quad on the lateral aspect of it, and we're pivoting, cross frictions, and knee bending as we find our sore spots there. So spend a bit of time using your foam roller. You can get harder rollers if that becomes too easy and doesn't give enough feedback through there. Now we're going to go through a VMO release using our ball. So in that position that we just identified here, we're going to place that that ball underneath our VMO. We're going to wriggle around until we feel that sore spot. Once we feel that sore spot, we're going to breathe, and we're going to spend a bit of time there, and then we're going to do some little cross frictions using our foot to manipulate the movement. And we're simply going to spend some time here releasing that VMO. Now, if you've got a lot of knee pain or discomfort, or the knees feel tight when you warm up, you want to make sure you're releasing your VMO, your quads, your anterior tibialis, and your calves. So that's all the muscles that surround your knee that have a pulling effect. If something's tight, it's going to pull your kneecap out of alignment potentially and cause you some issues. Now, if you've got pain in your knee, refer yourself out to get someone to look at, but that VMO release should be one of your points of call if you feel like you have stiff knees before activity to get you prepped for moving. There you have it, guys. Quads, VMO, ITB, jump on there before you do any heavy sort of squatting, running, or loading that type of movement. The next we're going to move on to is hip extension. Now, I'm in hip extension here. If we can't reach this position comfortably, we need to take some work to do it. Now, we're going to use our rack here, and we're going to do what's called a couch stretch. Now, this has been pretty popular, so you've probably seen this before. And we're simply going to bring our foot up, and we're going to walk our knee into the anchor position or closer to the wall or the rack or what we're using. We can even use our couch at home, aka the couch stretch, and we're going to stand up nice and tall. Now we're going to squeeze our bum, get full hip extension here so we're not pushed back and leaning forward, we're nice and tall, and we're simply going to squeeze our glutes and breathe here. By breathing and relaxing every breath out, we'll allow ourselves to relax through the hip and extend through the movement. So once we're here 2 minutes, we switch our sides, we go to the other side. Another way we can work on hip extension is our lunge hip activation. So we're going to take a big step forward, and we're going to bring that back leg off the ground, and we're going to be in full hip extension here. So the things I want you to think about is shoulder in line with ankle, that back ankle. And what we're going to do here is start by drawing some circles with our hip. And we can move into things where we're dropping our elbow to the floor. And we can even add a reach to help improve that thoracic mobility. So we're here, 2 to 3 minutes each side, switching our sides once we're done, and repeating that same sequence. The final little stretch we can do is called a Brettzel. Now, this was taught through my training with the FMS team, and that's involving thoracic mobility again and hip extension. So we're going to lay down on our back, and we're going to bring a leg across, and we're going to put ourselves into this nice little position that's going to work on hip extension and thoracic mobility at the same time. The key takeaway here is if you can't get into the required position, you then need to break out to the individual skills like the couch stretch or the lunging hip activation, and then some shoulder mobility, maybe even some pec release or more trigger point to help get you into that position. So this is more of like a compound mobility stretch. So we're laying down, we're going to bring our leg across the body, pinning this knee to the floor. If we can't get our knee to the floor, we can put a foam roller underneath to help raise that level. But here, from here, we're going to bend this leg and pull our leg back towards our body. The opposite hand is on top of that knee, and our other hand is on the foot from the leg behind us. We're then simply going to rotate open this way using our breath, and on the breath out, we're going to move open. So we're going to breathe in. And we get into position here. Notice how I'm breathing all the way through the position. And then as we feel everything relax, we're going to increase that range by using our eyes, pulling ourselves to the floor. Once we get our shoulder to the floor, spend a bit of time here, still breathing, and then we come out under control. So we can switch our sides, but what you'll notice there is if you've got your hip extended and you can't rotate open, you need to break it out to our couch stretch, add some shoulder mobility in there, and see how we can improve that compound mobility stretch. The next we're going to go on to is internal and external rotation of the hip. So we focused on that forwards and backwards movement, being hip extension, that we associate with running and squatting and things like that. But what about those little stabilizers? Now, internal and external rotation, quite often we'll find we're good on one and horrible on the other. So what I want you to do is pick the one you're not good at or the one that gives you the most grief and work on that in your warm-ups. So a simple internal rotator warm-up that we can do is our simple hip prying drill. We're going to get into our squat position here, and we're going to be nice and tall, shoulders back, big chest, nice and upright. We're going to jam those elbows in and bring our hands together like so. So from here, we're just going to move back and forth. We're pivoting, we're turning on our feet, but our heels stay in contact with the floor. And we're going to sit here for 2 minutes, just moving back and forth, ever so slightly. Now, if we find that's a little bit too easy, we're going to move into a frog stretch. Now, this is going to test internal rotation. So we're going to be on the on the inside of our knees, so that VMO we mentioned in our trigger point series. And we're going to be legs spread nice and wide, knee in line with the hip. So from here, we're simply going to internally rotate, raising that foot off the floor into position here. So you might notice you're bad at internal rotation. This is my weakness out of internal and external. So I spend a lot of time here, 2 to 3 minutes in my warm-up each side to help improve that position. Now, if this is too hard for you, we bring our feet back, elbows up off, hands on the ground, elbows up off the floor, and we simply just go into that frog rock. Okay? Into position, trying to get our bum to our feet, rocking back and forth. Now this one is one of my favorites because we can do this at our desk when we're working. So if you're a desk-bound worker, great little stretch for you to be able to utilize your office chair, and you're going to actually get a bit of internal hip mobility here, so you might feel a stretch through your adductors, and you're also going to get that thoracic mobility as well. So in that nice tall position, hand inside the thigh, we're going to breathe in, hand behind the back again, and we're going to open up. So the idea is to try and look at that wall behind you and use the prying of the hand inside the hip to increase that range. Once we're there, switch sides, working as much as we need until we feel that stretch increase, and opening up. Now it's time for external. What we're going to do, as the most advanced version we can probably look at for this particular series, is an active pigeon. Foot comes up in line with the hands. So your toes should be in line with the base of your palms, and you should be able to externally rotate that hip to the floor. Now, if you can't get here, we can simply regress this to a stretch. So we bring the leg across and we come down onto our elbows and we relax until we feel comfortable here. Once that occurs, maybe after 2 or 3 minutes, we bring this foot back in the middle of the hands, toes in line with the heel of the palm, and we're dropping that to the floor. So on the other side, you're dropping it to the floor. Now, the tricky thing with internal and external rotation, you might be tight externally on one side and tight internally on the other. It's important to understand where you're tight and where your asymmetries and limitations are, and then apply the mobility work to those direct areas. Don't neglect the other areas, but add the bits that improve your warm-up and leave the rest to the side. Assess it once you've done it, and then keep continually improving your warm-up structure with your mobility stretches that address your individual needs. The next is the Brettzel 2. Now we're going to start in this 90-90 position. So instep of the foot in contact with the knee in this 90-90 position, and we're going to rotate this way. So we come across and place our hand down beside our hip. So you'll see this line here. Now we're going to take a deep breath in, and we're going to shoot this arm through underneath. Ideally, we should be able to get this shoulder to the floor. Now this is going to challenge our posterior chain, meaning our back, our glutes, and that hip coming across, loading that bottom hip and glute, and that shoulder range going forward into flexion. Things you need to look for here is not being able to get that shoulder to the floor as you sweep through. A level up we can do on that stretch, which increases the difficulty on that posterior chain, is extending this leg that you're rotated to the side of. So by extending this leg, we are actually going to challenge the range through posterior chain all the way down to our heel. And as you can see, I've got a bit of work there. I can't get my shoulder to the floor. So let's go through a couple of breaths, see if we can increase range comfortably and steadily through using the breath. And there you go, shoulder to the floor. Only took a few breaths, but at the very start, it was very tight through that posterior chain, and it took a few breaths to loosen up and to open up into that position. Hip bridging, super useful as we're developing our hinge pattern when we look at being able to use our glutes to drive into that hip extension. Now, starting from the floor, ticking the boxes, here's a couple of hip bridge variations you can do to find out where your weaknesses lie and then what you need to put into your program to help fix those. So the first thing we have, instead of just showing you the boring old double foot hip bridge, we're going to go straight to a single side, and we're going to go for a straight leg bridge. Now, laying down, if we then put me upright, this kind of looks like running. So if we have problems getting into hip extension from this position, we should definitely look at avoiding exercises that require full hip extension on a loaded leg. So if we're in the position here, we're simply just bridging off the ground, squeezing the glutes, and it's a short movement there. Our knee on this top leg, or this flexion pattern we've got here, shouldn't come down and shouldn't take an overly large amount of effort to keep in this locked position. We should be easily able to bridge 15 to 20 reps into that straight leg position. The next upgrade we can do is our leg lock bridge. Now, by using this simple ball here or a bit of feedback, we can lock a hip into place to make sure we can maintain hip flexion whilst going into hip extension on the opposite leg. So locking the ball in, not jamming it right in the crease, but placing it just under the rib cage, palms up, bridging up into position. Now we should be able to get to hip extension without that ball falling out. If that ball falls out, we start again. So 10 to 15, maybe 20 reps in there, working on keeping that leg locked, focusing on the hip flexion and lock part to get into hip extension on that spare leg. We switch the legs, we see which fatigues first, or if we can't maintain the pattern on either side. The final version, once we've mastered those, we can elevate the service and then do an elevated hip bridge. We can still use the components like the leg lock by using the ball tucked in, but the basic setup is simply coming over to a bench, keeping our bum close enough to the bench, heel comes up on top of the bench, we're bridging up into that flexion position on the opposite leg that isn't loaded, and we're driving up into position like so. Now this will isolate your hamstrings a little bit more and will help you recruit hamstrings into the hip bridge movement. Remember, focus on squeezing the glutes to the roof, full hip extension, maintaining flexion on this opposite leg.